February 29, 1940, the Ambassador Hotel's Coconut Grove nightclub buzzed with Hollywood's elite celebrating the Academy Awards. But in the far corner, away from the main tables, sat a woman who would make history that night. Hattie McDaniel wore a stunning turquoise gown adorned with rhinestones, white gardenias perfectly placed in her hair. She looked every bit the star, yet the hotel's strict no black policy meant she needed special permission just to enter the building. When her name was called for Best Supporting Actress, she became the first African-American to win an Oscar. But as she walked to that stage, she wasn't walking from the Gone with the Wind table where her white co-stars sat. She was walking from a segregated corner, escorted there because even on her most triumphant night, Hollywood reminded her of her place. The segregation didn't start that night. Months earlier, when Gone with the Wind premiered in Atlanta, hundreds of thousands lined the streets to see the stars, but Hattie wasn't among them. Georgia's laws forbade black actors from attending, even though her portrayal of Mammy was being praised as extraordinary. Clark Gable was furious. He threatened to boycott the entire premiere unless Hattie could attend, but she convinced him to go without her, not wanting to create controversy. While her co-stars basked in the spotlight at the Lowe's Grand Theater, Hattie stayed home in Los Angeles. The woman who helped make the film an instant cultural sensation wasn't welcome at its celebration. Even more twisted, a young Martin Luther King Jr. was in that Atlanta crowd, dressed as a slave in the event's theatrical choir, watching a celebration that excluded the very actress who brought dignity to such roles. Producer David Selznick had to call in personal favors just to get other black cast members basic hotel accommodations in segregated Atlanta, but even he couldn't override the theater's whites-only policy. But the real battle wasn't with white Hollywood, it was with her own community. The NAACP launched a campaign against Hattie, calling her an Uncle Tom who perpetuated dangerous stereotypes. Walter White, the organization's leader, publicly condemned her for accepting roles that portrayed black people as subservient and happy in their oppression. The criticism was brutal and relentless. They argued that her performances made it harder for all black people to overcome racism and succeed beyond servant roles. But Hattie fired back with a response that became legendary. "I'd rather play a maid for $700 a week than be one for $7. She argued that she was opening doors, not closing them. In a 1947 Hollywood Reporter piece, she defended herself brilliantly, writing that she had convinced directors to remove offensive dialect from modern pictures, and that critics underestimated audiences' intelligence. She pointed out that during her career, Hollywood had hired more black actors and workers than ever before. The attacks from both sides were crushing, but she refused to apologize for surviving in a system designed to exclude her. Her response to the double-edged sword was defiant. She was an actress, and when they called cut, she was no longer that character. Here's what makes her story even more heartbreaking. Despite her fame and that $700 weekly salary she mentioned, Hattie died virtually broke. When she passed in 1952, her estate was valued at just $10,336. That's about $95,000 today. But she owed $11,000 to the IRS. Her belongings, including her Oscar, had to be sold to pay debts. This wasn't a woman living lavishly while playing servants. She was barely making ends meet despite appearing in over 300 films, though she only received screen credit for 83 of them. The Hollywood machine that celebrated her historic win had systematically underpaid her for years. While white stars accumulated wealth and owned multiple properties, Hattie struggled financially even at the height of her fame. She had to sell her dream home in Los Angeles due to financial pressures. The system that gave her an Oscar also ensured she couldn't truly benefit from her success. Even more painful, studios forced her to do a post-Oscar promotional tour dressed in her Mammy costume, turning her historic achievement into a marketing gimmick that reinforced the very stereotypes she was fighting against. Yet here's the most shocking part of her financial story. Despite being attacked by the NAACP and barely scraping by herself, Hattie secretly donated generous amounts to that very organization. She also spent her own money organizing entertainment for black soldiers during World War II as chairman of the Negro Division of the Hollywood Victory Committee. She put together shows featuring herself, Lena Horne, and Ethel Waters performing at military bases and hospitals to boost morale for Black troops who faced discrimination even while serving their country. Her Los Angeles home became a refuge for struggling Black performers, where she'd hand out money to anyone who needed it. Friends described her as almost recklessly generous, supporting family, friends, and strangers alike. She was giving away money she couldn't afford to lose, supporting the very people who publicly criticized her choices. Biographer Jill Watts noted that people would just show up at her door knowing she'd help them financially. Talk about taking the high road while fighting for survival. The disrespect followed her even after her passing, and this part gets really weird. Hattie left her Oscar to Howard University, the historically Black college that had honored her with a luncheon after her win. But remember, her estate was insolvent, so the courts ordered all assets sold to pay creditors first. Professor Wee Burlett Carter believes the Oscar was treated as just another miscellaneous item and sold to a private collector. An appraiser in and dismissed the award as having no value during estate proceedings. Imagine that level of disrespect for the first Oscar won by a Black person. Somehow, actor Lee Whipper brought an Oscar to Howard University around 1960 for their Fine Arts Building opening. But in the 1970s, that Oscar mysteriously vanished from the university and has never been found. Some theories suggest students threw it in the Potomac River during campus protests, but Professor Carter rejects this idea. The Academy eventually provided a replacement Oscar to Howard in 2021, but the original remains missing. After 50 years, the whereabouts of Hollywood's most historically significant Oscar remains a complete mystery. It's like her achievements keep getting erased even after her passing. Even in losing consciousness, Hattie faced one final rejection that perfectly encapsulated her entire experience. She had two wishes: donate her Oscar to Howard University and be buried in Hollywood Cemetery. She got neither. The Oscar disappeared, as we discussed, but the cemetery rejection was particularly cruel. Hollywood Forever Cemetery, where many stars rest, refused her burial application solely because of her race. In 1952, even in the afterlife, Hollywood maintained its segregation. She was buried instead at Angelus Rosedale, which was actually the first Los Angeles cemetery open to all races. The irony is devastating. She broke barriers in life, but was denied a resting place among the stars she had worked alongside for decades. Her great-nephew Edgar Goff spent decades fighting to preserve her memory, and finally succeeded in getting that memorial placed. The woman who broke barriers in life was denied a resting place among her peers because of the color of her skin. Hattie McDaniel lived an impossible position that reveals something profound about progress versus acceptance. She was simultaneously celebrated and rejected, honored and humiliated, praised and condemned. White Hollywood gave her an Oscar, but forced her to sit in segregated corners. The Black community attacked her for the very roles that allowed her to break barriers and support others financially. She donated to organizations that publicly denounced her while struggling to pay her own bills. She convinced directors to remove offensive elements from films while being criticized for appearing in them at all. What's most remarkable is how she handled this impossible situation with grace and determination. She never publicly complained about the segregated Oscar ceremony. She maintained friendships with white co-stars like Clark Gable while supporting Black causes behind the scenes. She defended her choices without attacking her critics. Her story isn't just about one woman's struggle. It's about the impossible choices faced by pioneers who must navigate between worlds that both need them and reject them. Today, when we debate representation and authenticity in entertainment, Hattie's story reminds us that progress is rarely pure and never simple. Sometimes breaking barriers requires compromises that future generations will judge harshly. But without those compromises, those barriers might never break at all. Her legacy forces us to ask, what would we have done in her position? And are we brave enough to answer honestly?